Coming up, the 7th Annual Tribal Energy Summit starts this week, and the Yurok tribe is also hosting a summit on missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. We get a preview of those events, plus more on the life expectancy drop for Native people. I'm Mackenzie Allen Charmley, filling in for Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Chinangale, we're glad you could join us. Indian Country lost 2 elders this weekend. The family of Sacheen Littlefeather confirmed she died after a long battle with cancer. She came to prominence in 1973 when Marlon Brando asked her to refuse his Best Actor Oscar for the movie The Godfather. Sacheen read about this statement and the mistreatment of Native Americans in Hollywood and spoke of the ongoing standoff at Wounded Knee. At the time, Sacheen said she was glad she was still alive to receive that apology. She died yesterday. Sacheen Littlefeather was 75. Kevin Locke died unexpectedly this weekend in Custer, South Dakota. He was a world-renowned hoop dancer and traditional flute player. He was also a strong advocate for the revitalization of the Lakota Dakota language. According to Inforum in Fargo, North Dakota, his lineage includes great-grandfather Little Crow. Little Crow was the leader of the 1862 Minnesota-Dakota Uprising and a great-grandfather, Bishop Charles Edward Locke, who presided over the funeral of President William McKinley in 1901. His mother, Patricia Locke, was an activist for American Indian rights and saw to it that Locke learned the traditional Lakota ways of his heritage while growing up. He died at 68. North of the Medicine Line, Indigenous advocates are fresh off of observing a major holiday. Friday, September 30th, marked Canada's second year honoring its National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It aims to remember the legacy of the country's residential schools, where many Indigenous children were forcibly taken to. It has been nicknamed Orange Shirt Day, which is the color supported by the movement. Just one of the many gatherings included on the lands of the Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, where people of all ages marched together. In the U.S., national organizations and several states have taken a similar approach by coining September 30th as a day of remembrance for U.S. Indian boarding schools. The difference is that in the U.S., the day is not officially recognized by the federal government, whereas in Canada, it is. On social media, people from both countries use the hashtag #OrangeShirtDay to bring awareness to the stories, and many of those posts called for justice and healing. Now to Arizona, where there are new developments in the case of a Hopi woman who was fatally stabbed. Fabian Durazo has been sentenced to 50 years in prison. In 2019, Durazo was a passenger that was being driven by Lyft driver Christina Hawato. After dropping him off, Durazo fatally stabbed Hawato. She was in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy at the time. She was also the mother of 2 young boys who are now ages 7 and 10. According to reporting by 12 News, Hawato's children were in the courtroom at the sentencing. Durazo originally pleaded not guilty to the crime. He then recently changed his plea to guilty, which is what ultimately prompted his sentencing. There are various Indigenous nations in the U.S. working to repair lands that were altered by European colonization. A project is currently underway to restore the lands of the Wampanoag. The people of the First Light hope to once again practice ceremonies and gather near the animals and plants they consider relatives. ICT senior producer Vincent Moniz reports.
This indigenous territory in Massachusetts looks pristine when viewed from a distance. However, tribal citizens and allies are pulling out and hacking into invasive plant species that overwhelm native vegetation. The Wampanoag Common Lands Project is an effort by indigenous people seeking to repair lands changed by settler colonization. Diana Ruiz is director of the Native Land Conservancy, which leads efforts to restore and preserve indigenous land for the Wampanoag Nation.
We were pulling out some invasive plants and watering some native plants that members of the Wampanoag community have put into the ground a few months ago. And I say it's part of a much larger project because it's really just the first phase of restoring this land that was gifted to the Native Land Conservancy in January of this year.
These efforts are also critical in the face of climate change, which has done significant harm to Native communities around the country. Part of the plan is to transform 20 acres into a highly productive food forest of native trees and shrubs beneficial to both people and wildlife. Mashpee Wampanoag citizen Ramona Peters founded the Native Land Conservancy and leads it as chairwoman. Peters says these efforts are all the more meaningful because the land holds so much history for her nation.
There's very little old growth forest here. So what we've experienced as a people, we've seen this, everything, it turned into fields for sheep. And not knowing what could come back. So we have seen that she will revitalize herself, left alone. So that's encouraging.
And recent trail camera footage is also encouraging. Wildlife is already deepening its relationship with the land now that the non-native footprint has dramatically diminished in this pocket of indigenous territory. In Bismarck, North Dakota, Vincent Moniz, ICT News.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Indigenous leaders will soon gather for a nation-to-nation conversation this week. The two-day conference is called the Tribal Energy Summit, and it starts Tuesday in Washington, D.C. Over 400 registered participants will meet with key leaders from the Department of Energy to talk about the transition to clean energy. ICT Shirley Snavy spoke to the director of the agency's Office of Indian Energy.
Well, welcome, Director Johns, to the ICT Newscast. It's really great to have you back again. And I asked you back today to talk about a historic event that's happening next week, the Clean Energy Summit, the Tribal Energy Summit. Can you talk us about that and what's going to happen?
Yeah, so we have 2-day packed agenda. We're inviting all tribal leaders to participate in the 7th Tribal Clean Energy Summit or Energy Summit here at Department of Energy. We have over 50 tribal leaders and over 400 people participating throughout the clean energy space and tribal clean energy partners. So it's really exciting to host this here in Washington, D.C.
I imagine the tribes that are coming are from all over the country.
Yes, all over the country. It's the lower 48 in Alaska, and we're just really excited that we're getting good participation. And, the focus is really and the theme of the summit is to how are we supporting, or what is their vision on tribal energy sovereignty? And, we've sort of seeded that in the registration page on our website, but this is going to be the bulk of the discussion throughout the 2 days. And we have one agenda focused with the tribal leaders. So they're going to get one-on-one time with Secretary Granholm and all of the principals that lead many of these amazing offices here at Department of Energy that have amazing opportunities in expanding clean energy. And also, the main, with this administration, we are trying to go 100% towards clean energy and to meet our climate goals and reduce our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions. And so tribes have a huge role in that. Tribes have they have about 5% of renewable energy potential, and I think that's really significant. It could create jobs and sustain good power for their communities and their homes, and they can also save huge on energy costs.
We have a lot of opportunities for clean energy. I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we are known for winds and also a lot of sunshine. So those are two areas I imagine that a lot of tribes take advantage of.
Absolutely. For our office here at Office of Indian Energy, we've supported over 200 mostly clean energy projects, solar, wind, battery storage, small hydro, and I think tribes naturally, when they pursue projects using sun and the wind is it's in line with who we are as Native people. And so I think a lot of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act and then also with the bipartisan infrastructure law help to support the projects to sustain and strengthen our communities, to have good power coming in that's resilient, that can outweigh the storms that we're seeing and the climate disasters that we're seeing in communities throughout the world and also in this country. And I think that's the piece that around the bipartisan infrastructure law and now the IRA that we're able to see investment in making sure that all of our communities participate in becoming more energy resilient and sustaining our homes and our communities with good power.
One thing that occurred to me is that climate change is hitting Alaska really hard. I know communities are just having to get up and leave and move their whole towns and villages because they're getting flooded, which impacts, everybody's life. But one of the things that maybe is an opportunity is that to really look at the power grid and the infrastructure for those tribes that have to move and start all over again. Is that a priority?
It is a priority. We have in the bipartisan infrastructure law, over $5 billion just dedicated to states, tribes to enhance their grid resilient. And I think this is really amazing that they're, in this law, but also in the Inflation Reduction Act. Everything is geared towards, making sure that communities can access funding opportunities to sustain their power, but also in times of, situations as we've seen in Alaska, that there is a plan in place that where we can support these type of communities that are going through natural disasters and provide some kind of relief, but also, in there's a lot of climate resiliency programs, and electrification is one that I think that is really important for these rural remote communities, especially in Alaska. We have $1 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law that is just focused on rural remote communities. And this is, communities less than 10,000 people. And so there's huge opportunity for tribes to participate. And our role as Department of Energy is to make sure we're engaging these rural remote communities and communities where, also English is their second language. I come from a community 90+% of the time our people are speaking our language. So making sure that the information about these programs, all of the technical pieces regarding the build out of this clean energy economy is translated to make sure that, our people are participating and our people are at the table as well and helping to design and partner with Department of Energy and, making our nation stronger.
That was the director of the Office of Indian Energy Policy at the Department of Energy. We'll be right back. Tomorrow, the Yurok tribe in Northern California will host its first annual tribal summit on missing and murdered Indigenous people. They are looking for answers to this issue. Joining us to talk about the summit is Joseph James, the chairman of the Yurok tribe. Welcome, Chairman James.
Good morning.
It's great to have you here. To start, could you just tell us who will be at this summit to address this issue?
We have a number of tribal leaders throughout the state of California that will be there. We have the local sheriffs that will be there. We also have our congressman, Congress Jared Huffman. We also have legislators from the state of California there, Senator McGuire, and also Senator Jim Wood. And so it's a packed day and event, and there's going to be a number of panels discussing the AMIW and the crisis here that it impacts not just us at Yurok in California, but across the nation.
Goodness. Specifically, to your knowledge, how many people from your tribe have been affected by this issue?
There has been, up here on the North Coast in Humboldt and down our county on the Yurok, there has been well over probably a dozen the last 15 plus years. The Yurok tribe is located in a very remote and isolated rural, and so again, and also California has the fifth largest volume of cases of any state in the United States, and so we've had declared a state of emergency in our addressing this crisis head on.
Are there any community events that are available to bring attention to this issue? We've been attending a number of community events. We've also been hosting a number of community events, spearheaded by our council, our Yurok tribal court system, by Judge Abby, also our team within the prosecutor's office. And so again, today we're having a cultural awareness event October 3rd. The summit event is October 4th, is where we can all come together as a panel. But today at 2 p.m. at Sumig, we are providing a cultural sharing event where we can all come together to bring awareness, but also stand in solidarity with our culture there. Goodness. And because this issue, it needs as much attention as it can get, but what do you think that are some of the barriers to addressing this issue on a larger scale?
For us back at home, for us, we're very remote and isolated. Everything is roughly about an hour to 2 hours away. And so we need resources because the state is a public law 280 state in California. That is a barrier, and that's an issue for us. Lack of funding here at Yurok, but also lack of funding within the Sheriff's Department on Humboldt and Delaware County. We're doing much as we can to provide services, and we have a great working relationship with them as our tribal police are cross-deputized in both Humboldt and Delaware County. But again, those are some of the barriers that I can think of and highlight.
For those who don't know, our audience, who just don't know how large of an issue this is, I know you touched on it earlier, but could you summarize just in how big of an issue this is in the state of California for Indigenous communities?
It's a crisis. It's huge, and this is nothing new. This is unfortunately nothing new. A crisis that we've been dealing with. It's not just here at Yurok in California. This is a crisis across Indian country, across the board. And again, we're not just hitting it with awareness. We're hitting with direct action. We work with the California governor. We want to thank Assembly James Ramos, the spearhead that, and the legislator there on the assembly side, creating a feather alert system. And that's the only second alert in the United States. And so again, we are not just bringing awareness. We are creating legislation, policy, and action, and trying to fill the gaps. So it's a huge crisis because our families need to find their loved ones, but also they need closure too. And so again, it's a huge crisis for the Yurok tribe in Indian country.
Specifically in the report that was released by the Yurok Tribal Council, could you tell our audiences what that was about and maybe the goals and what was found?
One of the things, the tribe on the spearhead again by our tribal courts and our prosecutor and our team here, we did a study report, and really contains a roadmap to response to the future MMIP cases. It covers a series of prevention measures. Mentioned in the report is emergency notification system. As I mentioned, is the feather alert system. We're also creating the gaps there of not having direct access to, they call it CLETS, which is data for our law enforcement and our court system. That is a huge gap and a barrier for us. And again, so for us, we are identifying the gaps and needs in the direct action that's needed now. And again, we are creating those responses for legislation changes.
Well, Chairman, I want to thank you for your work that you do for your community and for joining us on the show today.
No, thank you for having me. And again, I wanted to thank everybody that's been fighting this battle on behalf of the MMIP and with love and respect for everybody out there, and also the families that have been affected by this. Thank you for having me.
Again, the summit starts tomorrow. Thank you, Chairman James, for joining us today. We'll be right back.
Welcome.
Loudon Aaron is a senior fellow in the Health Policy Center at the Urban Institute. She has spent over 25 years conducting research and policy analysis on social welfare issues. That includes on health and disability, education, homelessness, and family violence. She is here today to talk about life expectancy changes for Indigenous people in the wake of COVID. Hi, Loudon.
Hello.
So to start, at a high level, can you summarize the study you did regarding life expectancy since the pandemic for our audiences?
Yes, I've actually been working on several studies with two colleagues, Ryan Masters at the University of Colorado and Steve Wolf at Virginia Commonwealth University. And we've been looking at life expectancy changes in the wake of COVID-19. And in particular, looking at life expectancy changes in the United States as compared to a number of high-income peer countries. And then within the US, we've also been looking at changes by several different racial and ethnic groups. And our basic high-level findings across several studies have been, that the deaths that the US has experienced and the resulting life expectancy declines have been far greater than other countries have experienced. We also are documenting how highly racialized the deaths in the United States have been, with resulting very dramatic declines in life expectancy. And we've also documented that the US deaths in the wake of COVID have occurred at much younger ages with profound implications for our entire country. Just to give you some numbers, between 2019 and 2020, so in the first full year of the global pandemic, the United States lost almost 2 years of life expectancy for everyone in the country, whereas across peer countries, so Western Europe, Canada, Australia, other high-income advanced democracies, they lost about half a year. So that was a very big difference. And within the US, when we looked at the numbers by different racial and ethnic groups, Native Americans lost a stunning 4.6 years of life expectancy. It was the single biggest drop of any group.
Goodness. To touch more on those findings specifically related to Indian country, what do you think are some of the reasons for that decline?
Well, I mean, certainly the biggest driver of the decline at this point has been COVID and the way that has played out. But as we talk about in a number of our articles and that's been documented fully, it's not limited to COVID. There are a lot of other drivers of mortality and poor health among different racialized and marginalized groups in the United States. We have very large health disparities and have had for many decades. And in many cases, they've been increasing. And so what we really want to kind of shine the light on with these studies and these numbers is that these are really reflections of kind of conditions of life in this country for different groups. And they are not as much reflections as is often portrayed of individual choices or behaviors or norms, but really around societal conditions having to do with resources, our education, housing, our food environments, physical safety, as your piece that just covered. There's so many ways that as a country we are really not fairly distributing the resources that people and places need to protect their communities and ensure that they're thriving.
Well, Loudon, thank you so much for sharing your findings with our audiences and doing the work that you do, and for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing Rock.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.